Hello there and welcome back to another edition of Forza Top Gear Laps. Today we're taking a look at some British cars and we kick things off with quite the British car. This is the 2015 Ultima Evolution Coupe 1020, 1020 horsepower, 920 foot-pound torque, 2,102 pounds of weight. It is the most powerful car here today. It is the most torquey car here today. In fact, probably save the Unicorn, the most powerful car we've ever had around this track currently. And well, that's exactly what it is gunning for. It is gunning for the Unicorn. Quite a different car from that car though. While that had four-wheel drive and insane speed, this car is a little bit more of an all-rounder. However, it is still extremely mental. Very tricky car to drive is the Ultima. It's hard to get it right, but once you do, there is nothing faster than the Ultima. It is just an insanely quick car around this track. It has 1,020 horsepower, so it accelerates like a bat out of hell. It weighs nothing, it has good handling. It's insanity. It's just trying to sort of make your mind catch up to the way this thing drives, but it is honestly probably one of the most insane cars I've ever driven in the Forza title. And the fact that it actually drives like not, well, it doesn't try to kill you that often, it is a good time. Equally as mental, however, is our next car. It's the 2011 Radical SR8RX, 460 horsepower, 260 foot-pound torque, 1,433 pounds of weight. On a normal day, this would be the lightest car here today, but not today. We have something much lighter later on. But yes, the Radical. Of course, this is equally as mental as that Ultima. It looks more mental. It looks like a race car, and that's because it kind of is, but it is on sports tyres, so it's not really a race car. Anyways, yeah, the Radical is... yeah, this was a car which back in Forza's old days would roll over quite easily because it had that much grip, and here in this game it is stupid fast. It's just stupidly fast. It doesn't have the straight line acceleration that the Ultima has, but it has way more corner grip than that has. Through the follow through here, it was doing about 120 miles per hour, which is by far and away the fastest I have ever gone through that corner in any road legal car. This is insane. It has the best brakes I've ever driven. It's just, it's otherworldly. It is insanely quick. Drive the Radical if you haven't already. It will blow your mind. Next up, going back down to reality a little bit now, we have the 2010 Noble M600. 650 horsepower, 604 foot-pound torque, 2,756 pounds of weight. The M600, a car, I wasn't really sure how this was going to be when I first got in it today, because, well, it is an oldish supercar. It's not quite up to date with your modern 2017 Ford GT and so on and so forth. However, it is still being produced today, which is something. But yeah, wasn't quite sure how this was going to get on, but it turns out my concerns were put to bed pretty quickly, because it turns out the M600 is a rather magnificent supercar. In fact, I would put it on the level of the 2017 Ford GT. It is a really very good car to drive, this one. It has super solid handling. It is just an excellent all-round car. It is similar to the Ford GT. I'd say the Ford GT is slightly better handling, can take a bit more speed through the corners, but this does have more straight line speed than the Ford GT, because while this is, I believe they have about the same amount of power, this might have slightly more power. It also weighs a little bit less as well, which really does give it the kick up the arse in terms of straight line speed. So yeah, drive the Noble if you haven't already, because it is pretty darn good. Next up, 2012 Aston Martin Vanquish, 565 horsepower, 457 foot-pound torque, 3,834 pounds of weight. This is one of the first of many sort of luxury Grand Tourer cars we have here today, because the British currently do two things very well: track cars built in sheds, and luxury cars that are owned by Indian corporations, or Germans in the case of the next car. But anyways, yes, the Aston Martin Vanquish. One of my all-time favourite cars. This, to my mind, is the best-looking car ever made. I think it looks absolutely fantastic. I love the way this thing looks. It is absolutely gorgeous. As far as the actual driving's concerned, not quite as good as that. It is a decent car to drive. I've noticed when I first drove this in Forza 5, it was a very weird car to drive. They've been improving it on every single Forza title, and certainly that is sort of the precedent set here in 7 as well. It is actually a pretty decent car to drive. If you can get over the weight, it is a heavy car to drive, there is no doubting that. Ironically, it is actually lighter than a modern-day Nissan GT-R, but it is still quite a heavy car. All things considered, it's not that far off 2 tons, I don't think. But once you get over the weight, it isn't that bad a car to drive. It is actually pretty nice. You might even be able to do something with this if you do some tuning to it. Next up, 2015 Bentley EXP10 Speed 6, 633 horsepower, 619 foot-pound torque, 4,497 pounds of weight. This is, of course, the concept car which would eventually become the brand new Bentley Continental GT. We don't have the brand new Continental GT, but we do have this, so I figured I would use this. Of course, this is quite an interesting car. If you look at it from the side, it is basically exactly the same as a Jaguar F-Type, but if you look at it anywhere else, it is a bespoke-ish car. I do quite like the way the EXP10 looks. I think it looks better from certain angles. The interior is absolutely gorgeous on this car, though. As far as this one goes to drive, unfortunately, it isn't quite as good as the Aston, in my mind. It does weigh a little bit more. It's got four-wheel drive. It's got more power. But the result of that just results in more understeer than you get in the Aston. It feels heavier than the Aston as well. It's alright, don't get me wrong, it drives perfectly fine. And in terms of sort of straight line speed, acceleration, it is probably slightly quicker than the Vanquish. It is a higher PI, if I remember rightly, by not too much, but it is a higher PI. But for my money, the Vanquish is a better driving car than the Bentley. It's the one I would take. Of course, you know, there's the Super Sports Continental as well, if you want to take that alternative. I can imagine that's not much better than this is. In fact, it might be worse. Next up, we really do have a boat. This is the 2016 Rolls-Royce Dawn. 563 horsepower, 575 foot-pound torque, 5,644 pounds of weight. A rather heavy car, as you'd expect from Rolls-Royce. So, of course, this is one of two Rolls-Royces in the game. We have the choice of this, or there is the Rolls-Royce Wraith. The Wraith is more powerful, however I decided to go for the Dawn here because it comes in nicer colours. I guess I really like this sort of like aqua silver contrast, and it's got like the wooden deck on it. It does look kind of nice. It is probably the most ostentatious car we've had around this track yet, but you know, I guess that adds to its charm. As far as driving the Rolls-Royce Dawn is concerned, it handles about as you'd expect. And what I mean by that is it's not very good. It is not a sports car, is the Rolls-Royce Dawn. It's not that. It is very, very heavy. It is kind of slidey through the corners. It sort of wobbles about, it jiggles a bit. Yeah, it's not meant for track use. Most of the cars in this game really aren't, but this one especially not for track use. And unlike the Vanquish, where you could probably do something if you stuck some weight reduction and all the rest of it in it, I don't really think there's much you can do to the Dawn to really make it handle any better. If you want a race car, you'll buy a race car though, and if you want to arrive somewhere in style in the most ostentatious way possible, the Rolls-Royce Dawn is for you. Alternatively though, you could go with our next car, which is the 1961 Jaguar E-Type. We come from all the modern cars back to the good old days when we actually built our own cars. 265 horsepower, 260 foot-pound torque, 2,900 pounds of weight. Of course, this is a Series 1 E-Type, by far and away the best looking of the E-Types. The Series 2 and the Series 3 never particularly tickle my pickle. You know, many people do regard the E-Type as the best looking car in the world, and I will admit, it is a very, very pretty car. I wouldn't quite put it on that level. I like the front end. The rear end's sort of always been a little bit weird looking to me on these cars. I know many people say, oh, well, go for the convertible. But the convertible, I don't like convertibles as much as I like coupes. I actually do prefer the coupe to the convertible, so yeah, the E-Type, not the prettiest car in the world to me, but I can see why people like it. As far as it drives though, I can't see why anyone would enjoy driving this car stock. It is very, very boaty. It has very, very wallowy soft suspension. You can see it when it goes through the corners. It's not ideal for a track, similar to the way the Dawn was. The actual Camry, you can see, is on a bit of an axis there. That's how sort of much it leans through the corners. Yeah, it has stubby little tyres, which are from 1961, so don't particularly hold the road. Straight line speed isn't terrible. I mean, 265 horsepower. I believe this is a 6-cylinder. The V12 was later on. You know, it's not bad. It's fairly okay in the straight line speed department, but, you know, you can make this car quick, you know, stick race suspension on it or whatever. Alternatively, if you do want to go to the track back in ye olde days, I recommend one of these. This is 1956 Lotus 11, 83 horsepower, 74 foot-pound torque, 1,079 pounds of weight. We started today with what the British interpretation of a track car is these days, and we end with what the British interpretation of a track car was many, many years ago. This is one of the oldest cars in the game, the good old Lotus 11. This thing first cropped up in Forza Motorsport 4, I believe, and became sort of a bit of a cult classic. among people who play this game. People really like this car. It is one of the only cars in the game where you can get away with about 100 horsepower and still keep up with most modern sports cars. Yeah, it is a pretty incredible car. Of course, if you put any power into it whatsoever, over 100 horsepower, it all goes to pot. But yeah, I mean, 83 horsepower from stock, you can't really expect it to take much more than that. Of course, least powerful car here today, least torquey, lightest, don't know if I mentioned that. As far as this car goes to drive though, while statistics may not be much to write home about, I assure you this thing handles like a dream. I absolutely adored driving the Lotus 11. It is so nice to drive. It's unreal. It honest to God drives like a modern day car would. It hasn't got modern day car speed, but it's got modern day car handling. It is phenomenal through the corners. I absolutely recommend you drive this car. It is epic. I loved it. Anyways, on to the times, and the Ultima does indeed beat the Unicorn slightly. It goes into first place with 108.181, which is good. It is nice to see an actual road-going car sort of top the leaderboard instead of that Unicorn. The Radical, though, was not too far off either. Goes in third place with 109.326, which is a very, very good time. Beats an R390 by over 3 seconds, which is incredible. The Noble M600 is equally incredible, going in sixth place with 113.362. It is slightly slower than the 2017 Ford GT, but to be honest with you, as far as tracks go, you know, those cars could trade times all day, and I mean, just look at what it's beaten as well. Beats a 911 GT2 RS, and that's one of the quickest cars in the world. It's insane. Moving down the board some more, we find the Aston Martin Vanquish in 28th place with 119.203, beating out an AMG GTS, which is pretty interesting. Also beats out a 2005 Ford GT. And the Bentley EXP10 Speed 6 goes in 35th place with 119.928, a little bit off of a Camaro ZL1. Yeah, it just doesn't have the handling, unfortunately, the Bentley for a track like this, which is a bit of a shame, but there's not really much I can do on that front. Moving down the board some more, the Rolls-Royce Dawn goes in 61st place, 125.776, which puts it in between a Local Motors Rally Fighter Fast and Furious Edition and a Lancer Evo 8. That's not where you'd expect a Rolls-Royce Dawn to go, but that's where it is. It's sort of hanging around the hot hatches and the rally cars and so on and so forth, which is interesting. And moving down, finally, we find the Lotus 11 in 85th place with 130.645, which is an incredibly quick time for a D-Class car. Yeah, that's astonishingly quick. It almost beats an RX-7 Savannah, which is insane. And the Jaguar E-Type goes in 91st place with 133.253. Yeah, it just doesn't have the handling. It's way too soft on the suspension. If it had hardened suspension, it probably could go a little bit quicker, more towards the BMW 2002 Turbo, but alas, that's just the way it is. Anyways, friends, I hope you enjoyed this episode of Forza Top Gear Laps. Next time, I'm going to be taking a look at some German cars, so join me for that. Until then, farewell.
I'm gonna give me